Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast for intermediate to advanced level learners of English. Are you exhausted, dead on your feet, or worn out? On today's episode of Thinking in English, let's learn some excellent vocabulary to describe tiredness in English. Check out the full transcript of the episode on the Thinking in English blog, and head over to my Instagram page, Thinking in English Podcast, for more excellent content. Last week, I released an episode on lazy vocabulary. I told you quite a few different ways to describe that lazy feeling we all get from time to time. However, while writing and researching for that episode, a lot of words, phrases, and terms I came up with didn't necessarily describe laziness. Instead, they referred to tiredness. What is the difference between being lazy and being tired? Often, we use similar language to describe both feelings, but they are different. Lazy means you are unwilling to do work or give any effort, and tired means you need rest or sleep. Sometimes these two feelings or situations can look similar. If you spend a lot of time sleeping in bed in the morning, you could either be tired or lazy. However, if you are tired, you need to rest and sleep. But if you are lazy, you want to rest or sleep. Or perhaps more accurately, if you are lazy, you don't want to do anything else. Being tired is incredibly common. You can be tired in the evening before you go to sleep, tired in the morning after you wake up, tired after a long day at work, tired after physical exercise, or tired after sitting down all day on a plane. I'm tired right now. I tend to write podcasts late at night, and as I'm taking some short trips over the next few weeks, I've been working a lot to prepare podcasts in advance. So I'm always tired. With all of these different situations and circumstances, surely there are different and more interesting ways of saying that you are tired. English actually has hundreds of different ways to describe this feeling. Throughout the rest of this episode, I'm going to introduce some of my favorite alternatives to tired. I'll try to introduce a mix of the most common synonyms, formal options, slang, and maybe a few phrases and idioms. Let's start with some of the most common synonyms for tired. Weary. Weary. Weary is definitely one of the most common and useful synonyms for tired in the English language. The word weary suggests that you feel weak due to a lack of energy. If you are weary, you are very tired after working hard for a long time. Weary comes from Old English, so it has been a part of the English language for over 1,000 years. For example, the traveller was weary after a long journey. Fatigued. Fatigued. Fatigued is another very common alternative to the word tired. Fatigue traces its origin back to the Latin word meaning enough. So, if you are fatigued, you have had enough. We use both the noun fatigue and the adjective fatigued when we are very, very tired. For instance, she was so fatigued that we could see the dark circles under her eyes. Exhausted. Exhausted. Even stronger than fatigued is exhausted. We use exhausted to describe the feeling of being really tired. All of your energy has been taken out of you, and now you are exhausted. You are completely empty of energy. For example, I was absolutely exhausted after a long week at work. Drained, drained. Similar to exhausted is drained. Drained also has a similar image in the head of a native English speaker. Both exhausted and drained mean to be emptied of energy. If you are drained, you are really tired. And we also use drained a lot to describe being emotionally tired, not just physically. For example, you look drained. Why not go to bed early? Worn out. Worn out. Now, let's have a quick look at a few phrasal verbs that we often use when we are tired. Worn out suggests a similar level of tiredness to exhausted and drained. If you are worn out, you are extremely tired. A person who is worn out is exhausted after working hard or going through a difficult or unpleasant experience. For example, he was worn out after hiking up the mountain. Burnt out. Burnt out. Now, burnt out refers to a specific type or instance of being tired, and it is very commonly used, especially in recent years. If you are burnt out, you make yourself exhausted and extremely tired by working too hard and working too much. Working long days without taking any breaks or time to relax can lead to burnout. Many companies have been allowing employees more flexible working schedules to help prevent them becoming burnt out. For example, after not taking a day off for over a year, the manager was always burnt out. So, the rest of the tiredness synonyms I'm going to introduce now are going to be slightly less formal. They are all still commonly used, but less so in formal or professional situations. So, make sure you are careful where and when you use these next words. Most of the time, it's probably okay, but probably not in a business meeting. Spent. Spent. Spent is an adjective that we use to mean exhausted. Like exhausted or drained, spent has a similar idea of being empty of energy. We can say that we spend energy. So, if your energy is spent, there is none left. Something that is spent has been used so that it no longer has any power or effectiveness. For example, sorry, I have to cancel our plans tonight. I am absolutely spent. Sleepy. Sleepy. Sleepy was the favorite adjective of my students while I was a teacher in Japanese elementary schools. Sleepy goes beyond tired to suggest that you are also worn out and able to fall asleep at pretty much any time. Sometimes you can be exhausted without being sleepy. For example, after taking part in a sports game. So it's important to use sleepy in the right context. For instance, the child was so sleepy that she fell asleep almost as soon as she got into bed. Drowsy. Drowsy. Drowsy is another way of saying sleepy, but with a slightly different emphasis. Drowsy is kind of in between being awake and being asleep. If you feel drowsy, you cannot think clearly and probably want to fall asleep soon. We are often drowsy when we wake up in the morning or after we eat a big meal. For example, the room is so warm, it's making me drowsy. Dead on my feet. Dead on my feet. Dead on one's feet means to be almost falling asleep because one is so tired. This is an English idiom and is used quite often by people. If you're dead on your feet, you are extremely tired. And dead on your feet is often used to describe feeling exhausted while you are still working or walking around. For example, that football player ran so much today that he was dead on his feet by the end of the game. Pooped. Pooped. Pooped is a slang term to describe being tired. If you are pooped, you are very tired from doing a lot of physical activity. Pooped is very informal and tends to be more common in North American English. For example, he was pooped after cleaning the entire apartment. Barely able to keep my eyes open. Barely able to keep my eyes open. So, the final phrase I want to introduce today is barely able to keep your eyes open. You can probably imagine the meaning of this one. You are so sleepy that it is difficult to keep your eyes open. I'm sure we've all been hardly able to keep our eyes open before. It's an idiom similar in meaning to sleepy or drowsy. For example, I was barely able to keep my eyes open during that class. So here is today's final thought. On this episode of Thinking in English, I have tried to introduce you to some alternative ways of talking about tiredness. Everyone gets tired, so I think it's really useful and important to have a few different ways to describe feeling tired. I'm sure you all have been exhausted, dead on your feet, or worn out at some point. Do you know any other ways of saying tired in English? Let me know in the comments on Spotify, on the Thinking in English blog, or send me a DM on Instagram.